humanity had always been overlooked by the greater galactic civilizations. The species was seen as weak, primitive, and unremarkable in every way. The Galactic Council had catalogued them as a minor species, one of many, and despite their rapid technological progress, they were deemed insignificant. That assumption would prove to be the greatest mistake in the history of the galaxy. It all began with the discovery of a derelict alien vessel drifting at the edge of Sol's outermost reaches. The ship was ancient, its hull scarred by unknown weapons, its power source long dead. A Terran expedition team was sent to investigate, and what they found changed the course of history. Within the wreckage lay the remnants of an extinct civilization, along with a treasure trove of lost technology. Among the artifacts was a data core containing blueprints to something unprecedented, a means of unlocking humanity's hidden potential. The data suggested that certain species, when exposed to specific genetic sequences and energy fields, could undergo rapid evolution. The process had been unstable, even catastrophic, for most races that attempted it. But humans were different. Their unique biology, shaped by millennia of hardship and adaptation, made them the perfect candidates. Scientists on Earth worked tirelessly to understand the technology, and soon the first human test subjects were chosen. What happened next shocked even the most optimistic researchers. The subjects not only survived the process but thrived. Their minds expanded beyond normal comprehension, their bodies became faster, stronger, and more resilient. Abilities that once belonged only in myths and fiction became real, enhanced intelligence, reflexes beyond calculation, and a heightened connection to energy itself. The implications were staggering. If the process could be replicated on a larger scale, humanity could ascend beyond its mortal limitations. But the galaxy was watching. When the first enhanced humans demonstrated their abilities, it didn't take long for the Galactic Council to take notice. Fearful of what they had seen, the Council convened in secrecy. They knew what this meant. If humans continued on this path, they would no longer be a minor species. They would become something else entirely. Something that could challenge the ancient order of the galaxy. The decision was swift. A containment directive was issued. Earth was to be blockaded, its people cut off from the wider galaxy. The justification was clear: humanity was a threat to the balance of power. The Council mobilized its fleets, sending armadas to surround Sol and enforce a strict no-fly zone. No one would be allowed in or out. But humanity had already prepared for this moment. The blockade was expected. The aggression was anticipated. And when the first Council warships arrived, they were met with a reality none of them had foreseen. The enhanced humans were not just evolving, they were becoming something beyond comprehension. As the Council ships advanced, their systems faltered. Communications were jammed. Energy readings spiked erratically. And then, without warning, the Council's ships were torn apart, not by weapons, but by sheer force of will. The enhanced humans had learned to manipulate energy, bending spacetime itself. They moved like phantoms, striking with a speed that no targeting system could match. The blockade fell within hours. The Council's mighty fleets were reduced to debris, their captains unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The surviving ships fled, carrying tales of an impossible enemy, one that defied physics, logic, and reason itself. Word spread across the galaxy. The lesser races, long oppressed by the Council's iron rule, saw an opportunity. They had always feared the Council's power, but now they saw a greater force rising. Rebellions ignited across the stars. Systems that had been under Council control for centuries declared their independence. And at the center of it all was humanity. The species that had once been dismissed as insignificant now stood as the vanguard of a new era. They were no longer bound by the constraints of the flesh. They had transcended their limitations. The day humanity became a galactic superpower was not marked by conquest or destruction. It was marked by something far greater. The realization that they were no longer just another species in the galaxy. They were something more. And the galaxy would never be the same. Panic spread through the Galactic Council as the reports poured in. Humanity had shattered the blockade without firing a single conventional weapon. Entire fleets had been dismantled as if the laws of physics no longer applied. Captains and commanders who had spent lifetimes enforcing the Council's authority returned as hollow shells of themselves, unable to explain what they had seen. The Council's analysts struggled to make sense of the situation, but the truth was undeniable. Humanity had become something else. Something beyond calculation. The Council convened in emergency session. The chamber, a massive construct orbiting the core of the galaxy, was filled with representatives from thousands of species. Fear rippled through the assembly. For centuries, the Council had ruled with absolute authority, ensuring no single race could disrupt the balance of power. But now, that balance had been shattered. The High Chancellor of the Council, an ancient being whose species had lived for over 1,000,000 years, addressed the assembly. Humanity must be contained at all costs. This is not a war of conquest or resources. This is a war of survival. Across the galaxy, armadas were mobilized. Massive fleets, numbering in the millions, began their march toward Sol. The Council's greatest minds devised strategies to counter humanity's newfound abilities, searching for weaknesses. No stone was left unturned. Entire planets were stripped of their resources to fuel the war effort. The Council would stop at nothing to bring humanity back under control. But humanity was not idle. On Earth, the enhanced continued to evolve. Their abilities expanded at an exponential rate. Where once they had simply bent the forces of nature, now they controlled them effortlessly. Space folded at their command. Energy bent to their will. Time itself became a suggestion rather than a law. The scientific community, once grounded in logic and reason, struggled to comprehend what was happening. Humanity had transcended the need for technology. They no longer relied on starships to travel. They no longer needed weapons to fight. A single enhanced human could do what an entire fleet could not. As the Council's forces advanced, the first confrontation took place at the edge of human-occupied space. The largest fleet ever assembled emerged from hyperspace. Hundreds of thousands of ships filled the void, stretching from one end of the system to the other. They carried weapons designed to tear apart planets, energy fields that could unravel entire solar systems. The Council was confident. No species had ever survived an assault of this magnitude. Then, a single human appeared before them. No ship. No armor. No weapons. The Council's admirals hesitated. It was impossible. The void of space should have killed the human instantly. Yet they stood there, unharmed, their presence radiating something that sent terror through even the most battle-hardened commanders. A transmission was sent across the fleet. You should not have come here. Then the universe itself seemed to break. The Council's ships, designed to withstand the most devastating forces in existence, began to collapse in on themselves. Entire dreadnoughts imploded without warning. Shields flickered and died. Weapons systems shut down. Time seemed to freeze, then shatter into impossible fragments. Some ships found themselves years into the past. Others were thrust forward into an uncertain future. Chaos erupted across the fleet. And the human? They had not moved. The survivors fled, their minds shattered. Reports were sent back to the Council, but none could explain what had happened. The fleet had been erased as if it had never existed. The Council realized the truth too late. This was no longer a war. This was an extinction event. Not for humanity. For them. The Galactic Council collapsed into chaos. The most powerful civilizations, who had ruled for millennia, now faced something beyond their comprehension. Humanity had not just evolved, they had ascended. The surviving fleet commanders, their minds barely holding together after witnessing the impossible, brought back fractured reports of ships vanishing, time distorting, and space itself bending at the whim of a single human. The High Chancellor, the oldest and most powerful being in the Council, stood before the gathered representatives. Fear rippled through the chamber. Every species present knew what the reports meant. Humanity had surpassed them. Not technologically. Not militarily. Fundamentally. The High Chancellor's voice trembled as they spoke. We are no longer dealing with a species. We are dealing with gods. Silence followed. No one dared argue. For centuries, the Council had seen itself as the ultimate authority in the galaxy. Now, they realized how small they truly were. The war had never been a war. It had been an extermination. And they were not the ones doing the exterminating. Across the galaxy, resistance crumbled. Lesser species that had been under the Council's control for eons now saw the truth. They had feared the Council's power. But humanity had rendered that power meaningless. Civilizations that had once been allies of the Council defected, hoping to surrender to humanity rather than face annihilation. Revolutions erupted on countless worlds. Entire planetary governments declared their independence. The Council's control, once absolute, fractured like glass. But humanity did not conquer. They did not send fleets to subjugate the galaxy. They did not impose their rule upon the broken civilizations. Instead, they did nothing. And that terrified the Council more than anything. Because humanity no longer needed to act. Their mere existence had rewritten the rules of reality. Desperate, the Council convened its last meeting. The most powerful minds, the greatest scientists, the most ruthless warlords, all gathered in secrecy, deep within an ancient fortress world. They spoke of surrender, of submission, of offering themselves to humanity in the hopes of mercy. But one voice stood against the tide of fear. A single Council member, one of the last remaining war strategists, spoke with quiet conviction. We have failed to contain them. We have failed to destroy them. But there is still one option left. The chamber listened in silence as the plan was unveiled. It was a last resort. A desperate gamble. A weapon, buried deep within the archives of the oldest civilizations. Something no species had dared use before. A device that could rewind time itself. The Council's ancestors had built it long ago, a failsafe against cosmic extinction. It had been locked away, forbidden. But now, with annihilation upon them, there was no choice. They would erase humanity from history. Before they could ever ascend. The remnants of the Galactic Council moved in secrecy. Their once great fleets had been reduced to scattered survivors, their dominion over the galaxy shattered. But they still had one last hope. Deep within the archives of the oldest civilizations, they had uncovered the forbidden weapon, the chrono core. It was not a machine, nor a device of war. It was something older than the Council itself, a relic from a civilization so ancient that even their name had been lost to time. The chrono core had been hidden for eons, buried beneath layers of reality itself, sealed away because its power was too great, too dangerous. It could rewrite time. It could erase entire species from existence as if they had never been. The last remaining Council warlords, scientists, and strategists gathered on a barren world far beyond the reaches of known space. The facility that housed the chrono core had remained untouched for millions of years, protected by defenses no modern technology could breach. But the Council had the codes. They had the knowledge. They had the desperation to use it. As they entered the facility, they felt reality shift around them. Time itself seemed to resist their presence, as if the universe knew what they were about to attempt. The air was thick with something unexplainable, something beyond science or logic. But they pressed forward. The core pulsed with an eerie light, its form ever-changing, as if it existed in multiple points in time at once. The lead scientist, one of the last great minds of the Council, approached the console. The plan was simple: activate the core, locate the moment in history before humanity discovered the lost alien vessel, and erase that event. Without that moment, humanity would have never unlocked their hidden potential. They would have remained insignificant. They would have never become a threat. The Council warlords stood ready, their hands trembling. The last few fleets they controlled were stationed across the galaxy, prepared for the final moment. If the chrono core worked, everything they had lost would be restored. The Council would reign once more. The scientist took a deep breath and activated the core. The chamber darkened. The air grew heavy. Reality twisted. And then, everything stopped. The council leaders froze in place, their bodies locked in time. The energy around the chrono core pulsed violently, but it was no longer responding to their commands. The lead scientists struggled to move, to speak, but an overwhelming force held them still. And then they saw it. A figure stood within the energy of the chrono core, watching them. A human. Not just any human. One of the enhanced. The realization hit like a supernova. The humans had known. They had foreseen this moment. And they had come. The figure stepped forward, unbound by time, untouched by the forces that should have torn them apart. Their expression was calm. Almost amused. You thought you could erase us? The scientist tried to speak, to plead, but their voice was stolen by the sheer presence of the being before them. We are beyond time now. The chrono core pulsed violently, its energy shifting, resisting, breaking apart. The council's last hope, their final gambit, was being unraveled before their eyes. You do not understand what we have become. The figure raised their hand, and the chrono core shattered. The explosion did not destroy the facility. It did not consume the council members in fire and destruction. Instead, they ceased to be. Not erased from time. Not destroyed. Something worse. They became nothing. No history. No memory. No trace of their existence. The great warlords, the last scientists, the council's final hope, all gone. And across the galaxy, the remaining council fleets, the hidden fortresses, the last remnants of the old order, vanished. In an instant, the Galactic Council was no more. Humanity had not just won. They had rewritten reality itself. The galaxy stood in silence. The once mighty Galactic Council had vanished, not in battle, not through conquest, but through something far worse, erasure. There was no wreckage, no records, no ruins left behind. It was as if they had never existed. The remaining civilizations, those who had once feared the Council's rule, now faced a new reality. Humanity had not only surpassed the Council's power, they had rewritten the fundamental rules of existence. The stars whispered their name in awe and terror. But humanity did not seek dominion. They did not claim the vacant throne of galactic rule. They simply watched. From the ruins of fallen empires, a new order struggled to rise. The lesser species, those once crushed under the weight of the Council's authority, found themselves free for the first time in millennia. Worlds long enslaved now governed themselves. Factions that had once fought against each other now sought alliances, desperate to survive in the shadow of what humanity had become. Yet humanity did not intervene. They did not send their fleets to enforce their will. They did not dictate laws to the newly liberated civilizations. Instead, they stood apart, distant, untouchable. The enhanced, those who had ascended beyond mortal understanding, withdrew from galactic affairs. They observed from the edges of space, their presence felt but unseen. Occasionally, they would appear, silent figures, watching, waiting, ensuring that no new tyrants rose to replace the old. The void left behind by the Council threatened to collapse into chaos, but no civilization dared make a move against humanity. Rumors spread like wildfire. Tales of Council fleets disappearing in an instant. Stories of entire star systems frozen in time for daring to challenge the new balance. No one knew the full extent of humanity's power, and no one wished to find out. Yet among the free civilizations, fear remained. If humanity had destroyed the Council, what stopped them from wiping out any other race they deemed unworthy? If they could erase an empire from history, what was preventing them from reshaping reality itself? The leaders of the most powerful remaining civilizations gathered in secret. The question they feared to ask was finally spoken aloud. What happens when humanity no longer wishes to simply watch? What happens when they decide to act? The answer was unknown. And that uncertainty terrified the galaxy more than anything else. Whispers spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity had not declared war. They had not imposed their rule. They had simply erased their enemies and then, watched. No one knew their limits. No one understood their true capabilities. And that uncertainty became a weight upon the remaining civilizations. Some species chose to isolate themselves, sealing their borders, cutting off all communication, fearing that any interaction with humanity might bring their own annihilation. Others attempted to reach out, to understand, to negotiate, but humanity did not respond. Their silence was more terrifying than any invasion. But there were those who sought to challenge the unknown. A coalition of the most powerful remaining civilizations was formed in secret. They called themselves the Ascendancy, a name meant to signify a future where they would not live in fear of humanity's presence. Their greatest minds worked tirelessly, searching for patterns in human behavior, analyzing every recorded interaction, hoping to uncover some weakness, some flaw, some sign that humans were still bound by the same limitations as all other beings. And then, one of their scientists made a breakthrough. It was subtle, buried deep within old transmissions, faint distortions in reality itself. A pattern, one that suggested that while humanity had indeed ascended, they had not yet reached perfection. There were anomalies, inconsistencies in their influence over time and space. If these findings were correct, then humanity still had a boundary, one that, if understood, could be exploited. The Ascendancy made a decision. They would provoke humanity. A single fleet was dispatched, its mission simple. They would attack an uninhabited system at the edge of what was once Council space, territory now considered under human watch. If the reports were correct, humanity's response would reveal something. A clue. A weakness. The fleet arrived. Weapons powered up. They fired into empty space, unleashing destruction upon planets with no life, no significance. A calculated move. A signal meant to draw out the watchers. For hours, nothing happened. Then, space itself seemed to tremble. A single human appeared on the bridge of the Ascendancy's flagship. Not through transporters, not through technology. They simply materialized. The crew froze, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The human was calm, their expression unreadable. They spoke one word. Leave. The Ascendancy commander, emboldened by the knowledge that humans might have limits, stood his ground. He demanded answers. Demanded to know what humanity was. What they wanted. Why they refused to rule when they clearly could. The human simply watched. And then, reality collapsed. The crew screamed as time fractured around them. Some experienced years in an instant. Others saw themselves aging, decaying, being reborn over and over in the span of a breath. The fleet itself twisted, its structure warping as though it had never been built to exist in this universe. The commander, barely holding on to his sanity, begged for mercy. The human spoke again. This is your only warning. The fleet found itself back at its original launch point, as if they had never left. Their systems registered no travel, no battle, no time lost. But every crew member remembered. Every mind carried the scars of what had happened. The Ascendancy had their answer. Humanity was not limited. Humanity simply chose restraint. And that realization changed everything. The Ascendancy collapsed within days. The fleet that had dared provoke humanity returned as shattered husks of their former selves. The commanders, once proud and arrogant, were now hollowed by what they had witnessed. Some refused to speak. Others whispered of impossible horrors, of being trapped in endless loops of existence, of seeing the birth and death of the universe, of becoming unstuck from time itself. The message was clear. Humanity had never been bound by limitations. They had never been hesitant. They had never been afraid. They had simply chosen restraint. And that restraint was the only reason the galaxy still existed. The remaining civilizations abandoned their ambitions of challenging humanity. The concept of war became unthinkable. The idea of domination, of empire, of conquest, all of it faded into irrelevance. Instead, the galaxy turned toward something new. For the first time in recorded history, species that had been at war for millennia sought peace. Trade routes opened where there had once been battlefields. Alliances formed not out of necessity, but out of genuine cooperation. Knowledge was shared freely. The lesser species, once under the control of the Galactic Council, now thrived on their own terms. And throughout it all, humanity remained distant. Watching. Waiting. Their presence alone was enough to maintain order. No one dared to rise as the next conqueror. No one sought to rebuild the Council's tyranny. Because the consequences were unthinkable. There were no more great wars. No more empires seeking absolute control. The age of violence had ended. And it had not been won through war or diplomacy. It had been won through fear. Fear of humanity. Fear of what they had become. Fear of what they could do. The day humanity became a galactic superpower was not marked by celebration or conquest. It was marked by silence. Because the galaxy understood the truth. Humanity did not rule. They did not need to.